Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our webinar on how to use big data to improve your transit operation, which you can read right there. My name is Waylon Mickey, and I am the content marketing person here at TripSpark. So before I get started, I just want to mention a couple of things. You will notice that you have been muted on entry, so if you have any questions, you can text them in. Everyone will see them, and we'll try to answer those at the end, unless it's relevant in the moment, and then we'll answer them immediately. And then, of course, if you have any technical problems, you can text us and we can try, but WebEx has a mind of its own, so, we do what we can. So next, I'd like to be able to, oops, I've got to now share my things here for this problem right here. Oh, yeah, I'd like to welcome our guest from Hope Network, Mike Hall, who's the Director of Service Development and Special Projects, and Candice Udaly, Director of Transit Operations at the Jewel. Hello.
Hello.
Now you say hello. Thank you. Awesome. Nicely done. So I just wanted to just kick this off by saying, saying a few things about data. Why is data important? And what is big data? Big data is a term that is used to describe the enormous amount of data sets that are now available to us due to advances in automated technology in particular. So now that could include automated passenger information, passenger counters, fare collection systems, management systems, and even social media feeds like Twitter and Instagram. They can also be a source of data. So as technology begins to insinuate itself into transit systems, there is a huge opportunity for operators to examine and profit from every piece of data collected. But there's a problem here as well. With all the data flying around, it's difficult to find a starting point, and you need somewhere to start. And you need to start somewhere. Why? As the screen says here, because you can't fix what you can't see, and you have the ability to monitor trends, such as like the effectiveness of a stop or a route, or trends in service for a specific time of year, and that sort of thing. You can verify the results of a new operational initiative. If you've set up a new service offering and you want to know if it's effective and useful to your ridership, this is one way to mark that. And also establishing benchmarks so that you can monitor KPIs to ensure your operations efficiency and growth. And yes, good news, you already have a mountain of data. Even without automation, traditionally, the data has been collected in a number of ways. Drivers are interacting with customers or clients. Your call takers are talking on the phone to the public. Your riders are most likely sharing their opinions on social media, as they will do with everything. And nowadays, digital data collection is transforming the transportation industry. So both of our guests today have found success using technology to capture accurate and real-time information. We'll get into why digital is more effective than manual later on in the thing. But right now, let's start off by talking with our guests and asking my first question, which in theory is going to be directed at Mike Hall. Can you speak, I want you to speak from the point of view of a demand response system and tell us a bit about Hope Network and what data you collect, and also why you chose to focus on that particular area of your operation. Mike.
Sure, thanks, Waylon. Hope Network is a fairly large nonprofit in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And in addition to transportation, we do rehabilitative services, community services, and a number of other things. We serve an 800 square mile service area in Michigan. We have roughly 20 different contracts and manage vehicles from minivans to large 24 passenger vehicles. It's very common for us to have multiple contracts represented on a single vehicle at any given point in time. So it's important for us to understand what is happening on board our vehicles as it relates to each individual contract, because each one has its own service requirements as well as its own rate structure. So we want to understand the effectiveness. How well are we serving each of our 4 customer groups? From a demand response perspective, at its most basic, we only put vehicles on the road when demand requires it. In theory, this is amazing because we only incur costs as we're collecting revenue. The challenge, though, is to provide the greatest number of trips with the fewest amount of required resources. If we add vehicles when we don't need them, we are incurring costs that we can't recruit. And as we strive to be good stewards of our resources, we really try to eliminate any non-value-added costs. We collect data to help us evaluate our service and make adjustments that allow us to be as efficient as possible. The types of data that we collect are represented here on the slides, but it's all started from our productivity measure. We measure passengers per service hour, and each of these components are drill down points that go into that measurement or that influence that measurement. We measure these things so that we can have an opportunity to intentionally interact with our service so that we can get ahead of any challenges that we may face. Also, so we can identify any potential future trends that would allow us to change our service offerings, change capacity on the road, or respond to any changes in demand. We started essentially at this point with productivity a number of years ago because it's something we already measured. So it was a great place for us. We were collecting this information manually. We were reporting it internally manually. So we thought it was a good place to start. And as we automated the service, we were able to collect and measure on a more efficient basis this more detailed information. Productivity, we believe, is the most accurate reflection of the health of our operation. And targeting these areas represented here on the slides allows us, again, to intentionally influence our key cost drivers, not just be responsive, not just look at the financial statements as they come out or look at any of the demand data as it comes out, but to be proactive and influence our key cost drivers, as well as identify trends that may signal potential future changes or potential current changes as well to our operation. You know, the goal is that we can respond quickly and also prior to any negative service impacts. And then any response that we have, we collect data so that we can measure whether or not a response was effective. This is a sampling of some of the reporting on the data we collect. The rides and hours is a very quick visual. This is probably the fastest and easiest chart that we look at on a daily basis. The top line there in blue is our ride count on a daily basis. The bottom line is the number of service hours that we have on the road. Essentially what we're looking at or looking for is for the gap between them to be widening. If we're doing more rides with fewer hours, that's a good thing. So it's a real quick way to identify whether or not we're doing well. The productivity chart just to the right there is our daily productivity measures. And this tells us any sort of trending or potential changes that we have in our operation. Any of those spikes below the yellow line there, those would signify any severe inclement weather days or any site closure days that would drastically impact our ridership. And then the lower chart is our forecast. So there are three lines there. I don't know if you'll be able to see them very well, but the center line is a trend, and then the orange and gray are actual measurements and forecasted measurements. So we can see at a quick glance if we're trending up or down, what our actual productivity measures on a daily basis are related to our trend, and then we also predict into the future what the next week or 2 weeks productivity we can expect to see.
Yeah, that's interesting because when I was talking to you before, you were talking about how you were looking year to year, like at whole seasons, like this 3 months, what you can expect and what you're going to expect next year.
Absolutely. So what we're looking at here is daily. Wayland, you are absolutely correct, though. We do this on an annual basis as well. So we take this information and we use it for our annual budgeting. We also aggregate the data into weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual totals. We use this to identify trends so that we can plan ahead. So not only on a daily basis, but on a seasonal or quarterly basis, we can see that next month's ridership is expected to increase or next quarter's ridership is expected to naturally decrease because that's the pattern with which our operation follows. Identifying that pattern is key to allocating the appropriate amount of resources.
Awesome. So now that's, again, on the paratransit side, and things are slightly different, obviously, from the fixed route side, and that's why I was going to turn to Candace, and she can speak more from her experiences at the Jewel in Dubuque. Candace?
All right, so as you mentioned, we're a fixed route system. We actually run paratransit as well, but we use a different software for that. And we do other things as well with this. But we have 31 vehicles, and we do over 500,000 fixed route trips per year. Of our vehicles, 18 of those are using TripSpark software, and they're doing fixed route service. So one of the things that we look at with our system and our data is ridership patterns. for either service planning for new service, or if we're looking at doing a service reduction or a shift in where we're going. So we're looking at when ridership happens. So when does it happen? What time of the day is it happening? What area of the city are people going to? Neighborhoods, shopping areas, work, industrial parks, that kind of stuff, looking at those patterns and times of day for each of those locations. And then the type of passenger. So we're looking at, is it a lot of half-fare riders? Is it so disabled and elderly? Or is it full fare? Is it students? Is it K-12? Is it college students? We have 3 small private colleges in our city, and we have a partnership with them for providing free transit service. They pay us, the school pays us, and the students swipe their IDs, and so that's a really important segment of our ridership population. And so understanding where they're going, when they're going, to those places is really important in us pitching. I think we're getting into that later too, but it's important to us pitching that continued partnership with those schools. And so knowing where the students are going, knowing where each of the different passenger types are going is really important for us for making those route decisions later on. We also look at bus stop location and, again, what types of passengers are using which bus stops, and that helps us plan for future infrastructure. So we're looking at stops with a high number of half-fare passengers. That's going to be a target bus stop for us to install a bench or other amenities for people with that need, so we can really target and focus where we make those improvements. And then some other key indicators for us, we look at rides per hour on those fixed routes, and then rides, this is like what my little report is like, rides by route, by passenger type, by the different time period. So I'll get into, like, for example, with our college students, we have a route called the Night Rider. It's 6 p.m. to 2:40 a.m. during the school year. You can probably imagine what that's used for. So that's one that I use with that group. So I look at a specific weekend, and I'm looking for college students versus general public riders on that specific route, and different windows of time as well. So not just like the day, but actually between different hours of the day to segment that out and report to our partners, but also as something that we like to look at ourselves if we're considering tweaking any of those services.
Actually, that's interesting because you're monitoring college students, and what are you using to do? I know what you're using, but I was just, maybe the audience would be interested to know how you're tracking college students in particular.
Oh, yeah. So one of the things that we did as part of our implementation with our software was we looked at our college student cards. So they have student IDs, and we have swipe machines on our buses. And so what they do is we've tied the college ID to our system, and we can actually track which school is using the route, so which student is from which school using the route at which time. So we actually have very, very good data as to which school uses the nighttime routes versus daytime routes, and what their travel patterns are, where they're coming from. So we can actually learn a lot about college students in our community with that data because of the swipe system. So they swipe their card, and it feeds in. We know what bus stop they got on, so we can target a lot of those different things. We use the half fare as well when we're looking at a route change to see if we're considering cutting service somewhere. We like to know who we're affecting. So are we disproportionately impacting a group that has a high need for our service, so that disabled senior population? We like to look at that before we even consider any changes. So we use this data all the time for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, I know. Actually, I remember you talking about identifying a particular bus stop that had a high incident rate of showing an unsafe bus stop, and then making changes. Yeah. Yeah, so we track and tie things with what Waylon was saying. We track bus stops and accidents at those stops, not necessarily through this software, but we track it internally, and so we can say this is an unsafe bus stop because it's had this many accidents over this period of time, and it helps us to look at that bus stop and say there's a lot of accidents. There are not a lot of disabled people using that stop, so we know that we're not going to be negatively impacting that group. Let's go ahead and pull it and move it somewhere else. It helps us make that case when we have, we're kind of torn between, do we take that stop out, or what do we do, or how do we handle this? If we can look at that data and say, okay, we know we're impacting a full fare passenger or a college student, for example, who has no disability, they can probably walk that extra block. It'll be okay. Right. Okay. And actually, it leads sort of into the next, question that I had, which is, who are you sharing this data with? I know that you are, I know that you deal with City Council quite directly. So a lot of these things that you're changing to the system that are impacting your riders, right? They all have to go through this vetting process where you have to talk to City Council about your plans and justifying it and using the data to justify your decision making.
Correct. Yeah. So we have a transit advisory board that we work with who. That's actually the first step, and I provide reports on all of this information monthly to them at their meeting, and they're looking at different routes that they think look unproductive, and they're kind of the first place we go with this information, and they're going to give opinions and thoughts and ask us to dig deeper into certain routes that they think might need some tweaking, and then we'll pull more data and get even deeper and more granular into times of day with certain bus stops, and is there a different way we can provide that service that's cheaper, and then pull that fixed route off and take it somewhere else that has a greater demand. So that we do a lot of that conversation with that group, and then once we gather all the data, and we really have built the support from our board, but then also the data to support what they're thinking, what we're thinking, with regard to that half-fare passengers, students, K-12 students, all those different groups, pulling that all together to really put together a solid proposal to our City Council to say, we've thought through all of this, so when we have our public hearing and people, in theory, will come in and share their opinions on it, we have a really good case to make. We're not just cutting off a route because we feel like it. There's a really good basis for support from the board, but also support with data. So it's qualitative and quantitative that we're putting that together and making that pitch to them. And so when we do have that public hearing at the City Council meeting, we haven't had a lot of public that's been strongly opposed because we're able to make that case against or for whatever we're doing.
I actually just want to move because now we're talking about the benefits and some of the things that that the data can actually be used to address. And one of the key things that you were talking about was about validating and making credible your choices and making those choices based on credible data. And now at Hope Network, Mike, and this is what we were talking about before, was your ability to analyze trends so that you can get ahead of problems before they happen. So I created a two-part question, which now has been rendered into a one-part question since you've answered half of it, which is, can you explain the effects, then, of technology on your operation? Mostly, both internally and externally, because we were talking in person more about things that had changed in the office with efficiencies there, but also externally to the public and the ways that it's affecting your riders.
I guess, again, just a brief recap as to how it's impacting us internally. We have a much stronger handle on our cost drivers, how to intentionally influence and manage those to be better stewards of our resources. We can create budgets based on trends and then make midstream adjustments prior to any reporting that comes out. We can measure objectively any service changes that we want to implement, and we can identify any potential changes coming down the pipeline and respond to that prior to any negative service impacts. We can also leverage this information to affect changes in our staffing in terms of how to staff our call center, how to staff our drivers and administrative staff to take advantage of their skills and provide the highest level of service at the appropriate time. So we can do that internally. Externally, what this has done for those that we serve, it means greater access to our service at the times that they're looking for it. It provides an opportunity for us to deliver superior service in terms of shorter ride times, more direct routes, better use of the capacity that we have on the road, and our funders appreciate that. The more capacity that we can use, the better value we offer to them. And it allows us for opportunities to evaluate and implement any customer suggestions for change or any funder suggestions for change. So as was mentioned briefly as we talk about route productivity, some of the suggestions that we look at come from passengers who may live in rural areas and have to travel through urban, or funders who are looking for a particular service rule to be implemented. We can use this data to project and to measure the impact once it's implemented.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, sort of the blunt question, which is there are cost savings that are drawn from analyzing where inefficiencies are occurring, and the same question goes out to Candace, which is, and I know too that that you've been able to use data to reduce your operating budget a significant amount simply by looking at the trends of those routes that you're talking about.
Yeah, one very quick example is that we were piloting a piece of technology that allowed us to evaluate how long our vehicles were turned on, essentially how long they were idling. And we collected that data, did some analysis, compared it against our service demand, and found that we were spending approximately $12,000 a month in fuel simply idling prior to the vehicles heading out onto the road. So we very quickly made a change in our policy, how our vehicles were inspected, and were able to realize those cost savings in a very short time.
Oh, that's great. I was actually also asking Candace exactly the same question because I know that they've done something, they've had a lot of extraordinary success doing that. Candace?
Yeah. So I kind of talked a little bit about using our data to look at routes and see who we're affecting and look at travel patterns. And one of the things we were able to do is we looked at our service for about a year, looked at the data a year's worth for 2 routes that we have that are kind of in more outlying areas. They are some of our longest mileage routes, and we looked at the ridership, looked at time of day of the passengers, and looked at our travel of the passengers, and then type of passenger again. And we actually were able to go from an hourly service on those to an every other hour service on those because the ridership was very low, and it actually seemed to happen at these 2-hour increments, or in enough of a pattern that we were able to make that work. And we were able to remove one entire bus from the road last year for fixed route service, and then our goal is to be able to steady our service and move that bus out elsewhere that we have demand. But we were able to save $100,000 in one fiscal year by pulling one bus in and making that route every other hour, and that it was all from looking at the data, and we actually had no change in ridership because of that change. So the ridership on those routes stayed exactly the same, even though we were able to reduce service at that degree. And we knew going into it that we would have a good chance of that being the case because we had looked at the data so in depth to get the idea of the travel patterns. So that's a huge cost savings for us. It's a nice PR piece for us, too, to say that, we're government, but we're also looking at our data and making really good decisions about what we can do. We're being very surgical in our cuts, and we have the data to prove it before we go in and actually make that change. So that was something we did that we implemented this past August, and we really didn't have a lot of pushback from the community because the time still ended up working for most people. And then the general community was like, wow, they're saving that much money. That's great. We're not going to complain. And then ridership hasn't been impacted negatively on those routes. So it was kind of a win-win-win, and all of that came from a lot of legwork on the backside by our staff and pulling that data out.
Yeah, and again, that's one of those sort of ancillary benefits that we talk about, which is the ability to prove to the public what's being done and why it's being done so that there's some sort of logic behind it, so that people feel as if there's some sort of control over their transit system, right?
Waylon, could I add real quick from a demand response side? We go through the same process of ridership distribution by hour and day of week, and we've experienced some of the same benefits. Our ridership varies by day of week, and we were able to consolidate some of our routes, remove routes from the road without impacting service, and then also, of course, realizing those cost savings. So this is something that's incredibly applicable on a demand and response side as well.
That's great, and I mean, maybe we've already answered this part 2 of this question, but I was going to talk about then how is that leading towards sort of long-term planning about what's coming down the pipe. But it sounds like you're already doing some long-term planning in your immediacy, right? Mike, is there something you want to talk about the future of Hope Network?
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to some of these service improvements that we've been able to realize and some of the trending and planning that we've been able to do on our traditional transit services, we've also been able to explore additional transit opportunities. Opportunities for expanding service as well as opportunities for implementing new services. So we've been able to kind of concept, pilot out, and are close to launching a brand new service. Waylon, I think that we've talked about this a little bit, labeled GoLux. Do you mind if I take a minute there and go through that?
Go ahead, plug it away. I mean, if you got a movie or a book coming out, you may as well do that too.
That's funny. That's funny. So we've been able to use this information to build out a cost structure and pricing structure for a new service that's unique to our area in terms of transportation, designed for seniors and individuals with disabilities. It is a similar service such as Uber or Black Car service that is incredibly responsive to customer needs. And the idea here is that this isn't just a transportation piece. We're providing access to opportunity and independence. And that's really what we're focusing on. So we are doing things such as single rides. It's not ride share. It's small vehicles, an MV1, if anyone's familiar. And then it's also highly orientated around customer service. So individual guest preferences, there's wait time involved if they want to stop at multiple locations, or if they'd like the chauffeur to stay and wait with them at a doctor's appointment, things of that nature. What the data has been able, the data has provided us the opportunity to do is to have an accurate idea of what something like that would cost us to provide, and also evaluate whether or not it's something from a price perspective that the market can bear. We are able to provide this service at a very, very competitive rate. In fact, this one-on-one service at high levels of individualized customization is approximately the same cost to us to provide as running a ride share vehicle that's larger and runs through more miles during the day. The reason that we can do this and also stay competitive with other companies that do something similar like a cab company or an AmbuCab is because of the data. We have such a vast resource in our data, understanding, as Candace was talking about, who's traveling where, when, why, and how long they take. Having that information available to us and then being able to identify trends and respond quickly allows us to keep our costs in control at a rate and in an order that's a real competitive advantage, and allows us to add different services, different value-add services aside from just running the bus on the road.
Right. Yeah, I know. And we were actually talking about collecting not only data on ridership trends and patterns, but actually about personal information, and about being, taking that to the next level of customer service and being able to automate, if you will, the personal touch that you're trying to give. That is your mission.
Absolutely. I appreciate you bringing that up, because that really is the next phase in this. So we've collected all of our operational data, and the next piece is collecting CRM data, customer relationship management, or customer information on their preferences. What types of routes do they prefer? Do they prefer the most direct route, or do they prefer the fastest route, or do they prefer the scenic route? Preferences on the types of stops that they like to make, chauffeur preferences, do they like one over the other? How they prefer to be addressed, which door they prefer to be picked up or dropped off at, any mobility aids that they prefer to use, or any assistance for the chauffeur. Collecting this information, analyzing it, and being able to report it out allows us to create relationships with the people that we serve, which is a key piece. Transportation is such a fundamental and foundational piece of life, and I think it's often overlooked. And if we can find ways to make it relational again, I think that there'll be a huge benefit, not only in the value that we offer as a transportation service, but the value that we provide to the community itself, our image, our value to our stakeholders, the integration that we have within the community. We are seen as a partner, we're seen as a friend, we're seen as a trusted service that can be counted on as a good steward of the resources we're given. And this, combining the operational piece along with the relational piece allows us to do that in a competitive way and explore opportunities like this that wouldn't be available to us without the data. Right.
That's awesome. We sort of went down a different path in terms of demand response and sort of public service, but it's not dissimilar to the fixed route situation that, Candace, you're in. And the same question is what is the long-term planning then at the Jewel? What are you looking at doing with what you now know, Candace?
Sure. Some of the things that we're looking at doing, so we're also part of the IBM Smarter Cities, and so we've got some data that's forecasting potential travel patterns in our community on a larger scale, so including cars, bikes, pedestrian traffic. So what we're able to do is look at our routes and ridership and the data there, and looking at which routes have high ridership and other routes that maybe have less high ridership but maybe are adjacent to an area that this new other data is showing us is going to have an increased number of trips. And so we're kind of merging our two sets of data. So we're looking at the existing patterns, future land use, or planned land use, and then these future trip generators, and kind of crossing all those together to look at places that we might have a chance to, take a route that exists now, but just tweak it a little bit to address these new land use areas and then the new land uses and the trip generation without negatively impacting current riders. So we're looking at some of that going forward. With our college students, we're actually looking at some changes to their service, that nighttime service that we have. It's open to the public, but they're the heavy users of it. So we're looking at some of their ridership patterns with that, and how can we're looking at the general public riders, where they want to go, and then also where the college students want to go and when, and trying to kind of pair those up but keep them, but still allow the flexibility that we need to do basically our drunk bus service. So we're looking at, at what time do we make this a fixed route or keep this a fixed route network to have the consistency for our general public passengers, and at what time do they really stop riding, and are we looking at really having more of a demand response almost within our night rider service for the college students. So within a certain boundary area, where do we take them, when do we take them there, how do we handle that piece? So we're doing some planning from that side. The big piece, though, is really looking at the data that we have on where people go now, and then the data that we have on where people are going to be going in the next few years, to really plan some routes around that. And so we have 3 short-term route changes that we're working on right now that we plan to implement in the next 12 months, and then we have about 2 or 3 longer-term route changes that we have planned based on expected land use, and if different businesses open up where they're supposed to be opening up, then that would be a place that we would be adding service and looking at tweaks to, again, additional routes. So we're using a lot of the old data, like the data we have on current ridership, and pairing that with where things are happening in our community, where developments are happening, to kind of do that planning.
Right. I remember also that you were trying, I guess we could go into data even more, but I just remember a conversation we had where you were talking about getting people off of paratransit onto the fixed route to try to relieve some of that cost as well, and using the trends of where people were getting on and off to establish different bus stops. I know, it's all... Yeah, so that was some of it. We actually get really into looking at where, we'll even map out where, like, group homes are for individuals with disabilities, and so we'll look at, do we have a bus route that goes near those homes? Because if we don't, then they're eligible for paratransit. Even if they're able to use the fixed route system, we still have to go through the extra expense of the paratransit. So what we've been looking at is making sure that we provide fixed route service to a lot of those locations, and try to kind of scoop up people who have the ability to use the fixed route system but just aren't because there's not a route close by. And so looking at a lot of those locations to transition people who have the ability to use fixed route back into our fixed route system, and then really focusing our paratransit side on the people who do really need it because of their disability. This is all dependent on having automated data collection. I was looking back, 25, 30 years ago at manual data collection techniques, and a lot of this really wouldn't be possible. It could be, but it would have been a lot harder to do, right? So that leads to my last question, which is really the bottom line, which is, was the technology worth it? Is there actually a benefit to using automation data and automated data collection over the manual system, both financially, but also in terms of just, operationally, stress-wise, personally? Candace, why don't you start?
Sure, I would say absolutely. So we actually didn't start using technology in this way until the fall of 2013. And we made our first changes based on it in January 2014. So we turned it around pretty quick, and we had been doing everything manually up until that point. Every mile, every ride, everything was given to one staff member on paper, and she entered it manually into a spreadsheet. And then we finally got our technology implemented, and that person now gets to spend her time working on a separate project that's actually creating revenue for us through some other contracting we're able to do on our paratransit side. So we took a person who was doing fixed route data entry and moved her into paratransit, where she's able to generate revenue for us on another side. So that's just one piece that we were able to do. Just that having that human touch, and the chance for error with that was so much higher. So that's one piece. And then, like I mentioned, with being able to change those routes and saved $100,000 in 1 year just by using the data and really making intelligent decisions with it, that paid for a lot of the things that we did to upgrade ourselves. And we continue to work really closely with the TripSpark staff to make adjustments to our tracking. So we're going to be moving into some other changes here coming soon with electronic fare collection, with not just tracking our college students who don't actually have a cash transaction with us, but actually moving our monthly pass holders and doing some partnerships with other departments in our community. So with our parking department, we'll be able to do some cross-marketing, and where your parking pass works as a bus pass and vice versa. And so so there's other revenue opportunities for us there that we wouldn't have had if we didn't have the technology implemented on our vehicles.
Yeah, there's no going back once you start.
No, you just keep finding more things you want to do, but it's all good. It's all for good.
Yeah. And as if I have to ask, Mike, I'm sure you have a similar type answer to that, just from everything you've said so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the statement that Candace just made about using data to make intelligent decisions. This has really been the crux of it. You know, the automated piece is also in terms of time. It saves time, it improves accuracy, it unleashes the power of the data. If manually collecting the data is so resource intensive that what we tended to do was collect only the minimal amounts to get us through to have an understanding of what was happening on the road, but not necessarily investigate any opportunities. So automating that process allowed us, much like Candace was mentioning, to reassign staff into revenue-generating positions as opposed to cost-generating positions. And the power of the data allowed us to see big picture things as opposed to small incremental opportunities. It allowed us to view the operation as a whole and to find associations that would have gone missed because we didn't have the resources to evaluate or record the data. And just like Candace had mentioned, our perspective, it allows us to pursue other revenue opportunities. It allows us to lower our operational costs, protect our margins, and be flexible and nimble in terms of responses to change.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, you basically just said my conclusion, which is, we're just at the tip of the iceberg right now in terms of data in the future and what's going to be collected. And as more and more systems become integrated, the more data, the more efficiencies are going to be found in all of this. Which I guess leads us to the answer to ask questions. Does anybody have any questions? I ask. Anyone?
Yeah, so we have a question from Matthew. He says they're trying to figure out how to collect data on how many riders we actually have ride our buses.
From fixed route side, so some of our trips are entered manually by the driver on the fare screen. So I'm just going to, if you have a mobile data terminal or a tablet on your bus, whatever software you have is going to have a fare screen, and our drivers will manually enter the fare. So we're pretty low tech. We're not a big system. We're pretty small. We don't have a gen fare box. We're just kind of basic. So we do have our drivers still manually enter some trips. So a person drops their cash in the fare box. The driver enters the full fare into their tablet ranger, and then it's tracked based on what route they got on, et cetera, however you set up your reporting. Some of our stuff is automatic, so like I mentioned with the college students, they'll swipe their ID, and one of the colleges in our community is called Loris, so the person swipes their card, the fare screen pops up and it says Loris 1, and then it's automatically counted. The driver doesn't have to do anything. If somebody gets on with a punch card or a monthly pass, same thing, the driver's going to punch that punch card, enter it as a punch card, see that monthly pass, enter it as a monthly pass. So we've got a combination of manual and automated passenger counting going on that's very specific to the person. But we also have the automated passenger counters, so we can compare those two sets of data. So we've got the manually entered and the automatically the swipe card data coming in on one side as a fare type, and then we've got our passenger counters giving us a number of people who've boarded. So it depends on what you're looking for the number of passengers, if you're looking for that fare type or if you're looking for just boardings. There's a percent error on the boarding side, and there's going to be a percent error on your fare entry side too. So looking at those two to make sure they're fairly close, that's going to be a good way to double check, and that's what we do with ours. Hope that answers your question.
Actually, Matthew says that he's using DriverMate, which is the tablet app, and I guess it depends on how that information is being collected. And for the card swiping software, you're referring to what exactly?
We use Streets for everything. Yeah,
right. So from the fixed routes, so like your smart card, is that what you're saying? We have another question from Susan, who says, what TripSpark Technologies modules are you using for demand response? Are you using Plan? What reports version module do you use? Do you use the canned reports, or do you use mostly SQL queries? I'm gonna ask Mike, since I don't quite know what you're using.
Sure, we're using Novus, and we're using a lot of the canned reports, but we do also create our own through SQL queries. Right. So the canned reports provide us with a baseline, and then any sort of deep dives that we want to do, we create our own reports based on sort of, specific operational metrics we're looking for.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was just laughing at the fact that I said.
And I just want to step in here really quickly and make one thing clear. For anybody on the phone that is not, particularly familiar with TripSpark software, I just wanted to clarify that Novus, Streets, and a couple of these other names that you may hear being thrown around are in fact TripSpark products. So if you're a little bit confused about what exactly they're referring to, these aren't like open source software that's just like available on the internet like Google Maps or something like that. This is all built out of the system, our system TripSpark, which they are using.
Yeah, the demand response style software as well as the fixed route ITS.
I was just thinking if I wasn't familiar with the software, I'd probably be confused right now, so I thought I'd clear the air a little bit.
I'm confused. I don't know where I am. Okay. Are there honestly, if there are any other questions that need real detail, I highly recommend you email them in, because I am not a data fiend, and I do know someone who is. So we can actually pass these along and get specific answers to specific questions, which is why I put in the email down there, info@tripspark.com. Use it, and we'll collect your data. Are we done? Is that it? I think that might be it, isn't it? Mike, Candace, I have to say thank you very much for everything you've done, especially for allowing me to ramble on myself. And I hope this presentation was demonstrated that data is important, and that it can be used to not only improve operations, but also find savings. And if you want a copy of today's webinar, it will be available on our website within the next 24 hours. So thank you all. We'll send it out. I've been told we'll send it out. You'll get one, all right? Just wait. And thank you for attending and for your questions. And until next time, a goodbye.